Hello YouTube, how's it going? This is the crossover and I'm back with another video. Today is going to be my second mock draft for the 2022 NBA draft. My first mock draft I did was just about 2 months ago, so I decided to hold off on my second mock draft until I got a number of individual scouting reports out the way, which we have over the course of the past 2 months. So today I decided to finally sit down and get out my second mock draft after the draft lottery, which as of the recording of this video happened yesterday, so that we know the finalized orders of the teams rather than speculating which players would go where and not knowing the specific order of the top picks in this year's draft. So now that we know the order and I've gone through a number of prospects, I feel like it is time to sit down and do another mock draft. So similarly to the last mock draft, in this video I'm going to be covering picks 1 through 15, and at the end of the 15th pick we're not necessarily going to have the traditional outro that we usually have. Instead, I plan on just releasing it's just going to go straight into part 2, which will cover picks 16 through 30 and should be releasing the very next day when this mock draft video comes out. And then in part 2 it'll just again pick up right where part 1 left off. So without any further delay, let's get straight into the video. Moving on to the first pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Orlando Magic selecting Duke forward Paolo Banchero. Now, when you have the first pick in the draft, you have to take the best player in the draft. That's just how it goes. And in my opinion, Paolo Banchero is the best player in this class. I also think he's a pretty seamless fit with this Orlando Magic team. They have a lot of interesting young prospects, but not necessarily any prospects with, necessarily a lot of star upside. And Paolo Banchero definitely fits that bill. I think he would slide in at the 4 spot next to Franz Wagner and Wendell Carter, forming a very formidable front court for Orlando for years to come. I think it would be their offensive centerpiece. I think, guys like Cole Anthony or Jalen Suggs, playing off of Paolo Banchero as cutters, also coming off of him in a lot of DHO actions. There's a lot of upside there. How you could even run pick and rolls or pick and pops with him and Wendell Carter Jr., just giving Jamal Mosley a weapon and an offensive centerpiece that can be used in a lot of unique ways. So again, not only is Paolo Banchero the best player in this draft, but I think he's a perfect fit for what the Orlando Magic need. Moving on to the second pick of the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder selecting Kentucky or Dream City Christian guard Shaedon Sharpe. Now, this is definitely not the popular pick. Usually you would see guys like Chet or Jabari go here at number 2, assuming that Paolo goes number 1. However, in my opinion, I have Shaedon Sharpe as the second best player on my board, so hence Oklahoma City is going to select him second overall, since Oklahoma City is much more of in a talent acquisition phase than necessarily looking for safer players. You can make an argument that definitely Chad or Jabari are the safer players. However, I'm really intrigued by Shaedon Sharpe's upside and just his skill set and his physical intangibles. And I think he's also a perfect fit on court next to Shea and Josh Giddey. I think he slides in at the 2 guard spot, and I think as he develops over time, he could really develop into the offensive centerpiece for this team, as I think he potentially has a higher offensive ceiling than even a guy like Shea, who is already an all-star caliber guard. So again, I think he would slide into the 2 guard spot from day one. It might take him some time to develop. However, the Oklahoma City Thunder have all the time in the world to develop Shaedon. He's not necessarily going to be in too much pressure, just playing in Oklahoma City, and it will kind of just allow him to develop over time. And hopefully him and Shea could form one of the more formidable guard duos in the league. Moving on to the third pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Houston Rockets selecting Gonzaga center Chet Holmgren. Now, in my opinion, Chet is not only the best player on the board, but I think he fills all of Houston's needs at the center position, as outside of, really Jayshawn Tate and maybe Usman Garuba potentially. There's not necessarily all that many positive defenders on this team. Jalen Green showed some flashes, but isn't necessarily a plus defender right now, so it can be said for KPJ as well as Alperen Sengun, and they desperately need a rim protecting center. So, I mean, they're getting one of the best rim protecting prospects in quite some time in Chet Holmgren, who would fortify their defense at the most important position defensively for the next decade plus. So that's a huge deal for Houston. And then when you look at the offensive side of the floor, I mean, Chet is one of the most versatile bigs in this class on the offensive side of the floor, as he's, a good rim roller, does a good job finishing around the rim and whatnot, but also has touch outside of the outside of just finishing around the rim, as he's an elite 3-point shooter for a center prospect, as he hit just about 40% of his threes on, right around 3 attempts per game off the top of my head, I believe. But regardless, Chet's going to be, a pick and pop big to kind of give Jalen Green and KPJ some space to operate. He's also shown some flashes as a passer. So, you could run off ball sets with guys like Jalen Green or KPJ to kind of utilize their athleticism off ball. So Chet Holmgren is not only the perfect fit for exactly what the Houston Rockets need, but he's also the best player on the board. Moving on to the fourth pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Sacramento Kings selecting Auburn wing Jabari Smith. Now, this is really a picture-perfect scenario for the Sacramento Kings. Jabari Smith, similar to Houston, where Chet kind of fell into their lap. With Sacramento in this mock, Jabari Smith falls into their lap, and I can't think of a prospect who's a better fit for their needs. And in my opinion, I'm not the highest on Jabari Smith in terms of, his ceiling and whatnot. I think he's going to be a very high-level role player, high-level starter. I don't necessarily know about maybe like a true star. Maybe he makes one or two, all-stars throughout his NBA career. But he's not going to need to. He's going to be playing in the perfect complementary role next to De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis, as Sacramento kind of stupidly decided to push all their chips into those two stars, push all their eggs into that basket. And Jabari Smith is the perfect complement for what they want to do. Offensively, he's going to be a plus shooter from day one. He's going to be able to come off screens. He's a very good movement shooter. He could take advantage of some mismatches in the post and really in the mid post. And that's really all you need next to De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis, as Sacramento doesn't necessarily have a lot of guys who just space the floor, and Jabari Smith is going to be able to do that at 6'10" for the Sacramento team. And then on the defensive side of the floor, we're talking about one of the better point of attack defenders in this class, who also offers you some weak side rim protection, and also a guy who's going to be able to play passing lanes and whatnot. So one of the better all around defenders in this class, and a very solid point of attack defender again at 6'10". So you're talking about Sacramento getting a guy who's going to be able to help both of their weaknesses in terms of not having a lot of shooters around around their two stars who both can't shoot, and we're talking about a guy who's going to be able to defend at a high level next to both of their stars, who both of them don't play defense. So Jabari Smith is really the perfect complementary piece for Sacramento. Moving on to the fifth pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Detroit Pistons selecting Purdue guard Jaden Ivey. Now, I would assume a lot of Detroit Pistons fans are kind of upset simply because they fell pretty significantly in the lottery. On paper, they might seem like losers, but in reality, I mean, you're most likely going to be ending up with a player like Jaden Ivey. So I don't necessarily know if you can be called, a loser. And in my opinion, Jaden Ivey is not only the best player on the board, but after him, I feel like there is a significant drop off in terms of the quality of players. I feel like there's only really 5 blue chip prospects in this class, and Jaden Ivey is one of those 5. And he's just a perfect fit next to Cade Cunningham, just with his ability to really put pressure on the defense. It's really Ja-like. I know the Ja comparison is kind of lazy, but it's really Ja-like. I don't know many other NBA players at the guard spot that are able to just explode the way he is, just with effortless athleticism, and just put pressure on the defense. And he, just similar to Ja, he does a great job of being able to attack and then midair just hit an open shooter. Just seemingly, he seems like he has eyes in the back of his head sometimes, and he's really like Ja Morant in that aspect. And I think he's a perfect fit for Cade, because Cade can also play off ball, and really Cade has the ability to play with Paolo, Chet, or Shaden, simply because of just how versatile he is offensively. But for Detroit to end up with Jaden Ivey and to have a backcourt of Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham, I mean, as a Knicks fan, I'm completely jealous. I mean, that is just, I don't know many other first and second year guard duos that are as good and as talented as Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey. And I mean, Detroit, you guys should be happy with this pick. I mean, to build around Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey, you have Saddiq Bey as a shorter wing, potentially your sixth man. I mean, if Saddiq Bey is forced to be your sixth man, I mean, you're winning. Okay, so I mean, Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham. I mean, what more can you ask of Detroit here? Moving on to the sixth pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Indiana Pacers selecting Iowa wing Keegan Murray. Now, this one really hurts because Indiana, although, the Knicks and the Pacers have a lot of history. I don't necessarily hate Indiana. I wasn't really alive for the '90s rivalry, so I mean, I don't. It's not necessarily that I don't appreciate history, but I just don't necessarily hate Indiana personally. So it's kind of been sad to kind of see Indiana just stay in the middle ground of the NBA for so long, and they so desperately needed one of these top five picks to add some excitement. And in my previous mock, I had Jaden Ivey going to Indiana, and I mean, I thought he was the perfect prospect. Similarly to what Ja kind of brought to Memphis, I thought Jaden Ivey could bring that to Indiana. So to end up with Keegan Murray, who's a great player, I think he's the best player, or at least in the I think him and Benedict Mathurin are the two best players on the board. But I decided to go with Keegan Murray simply because Indiana just has no real forward depth, while Benedict is more of a 2-3, while Keegan is more of a 3-4, and I feel like that's what Indiana needs. And I don't think the difference between the two players is that massive. So I decided to go with Keegan Murray here, a guy who's an instant impact player for Indiana, an instant starter, one of the best all-around defenders in this class, multi-position point of attack defender who's also a great strong side defender and does a great job maneuvering around screens off ball. So an immediate impact for one of the league's worst defenses. And then offensively, he's a very good cutter, knows how to move without the ball. And he's a great weapon for Tyrese Maxey to utilize as an off-ball scorer, as well as Malcolm Brogdon, and just a guy who's going to be versatile, a guy who can score a little bit with the ball in his hands, a guy who's going to be able to space the floor a little bit. So he's really a day one impact player for Indiana. I kind of question Keegan Murray's ceiling. However, there's no doubt that he's going to be an instant impact player for the Indiana Pacers. Moving on to the seventh pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Portland Trailblazers selecting Arizona wing or slash guard Benedict Mathurin. Now, in my opinion, similarly to Keegan Murray, I think Benedict Mathurin will be a day one starter for Portland. I think he's not only the best player on the board, but I think he has a fair amount of upside as well, on top of, again, being a day one starter. I think he will be a day one contributor for one of the league's worst defenses. I think he's one of the better point of attack defenders in this class. About 6'6", 6'7", with a pretty decently long wingspan, has great lateral footwork. I think he's going to be a guy who can be really useful in Chauncey Billups' scheme, being able to defend the way he wants to, very aggressive blitzing pick and rolls, and as well as being able to switch them as well. And I think Benedict Mathurin, with his length, again, with his lateral quickness, I think Chauncey's going to be able to utilize all of Benedict's strengths on the defensive side of the floor, and then on the offensive side of the floor, I think he's going to be able to come into his own over time. As from day one, as we all know, Dame is still on the roster, so he's going to be a guy who's going to be able to space the floor for both Dame as well as Anthony Simons. And I think in some of those minutes where Dame isn't necessarily on the court and it's just him and Anthony, I think Benedict is going to be able to handle the ball a little bit more, kind of showcase some of his shot creation and his ability to facilitate for others. So not only is Benedict Mathurin a day one impact player for Portland, but he also has a fair amount of upside. And I think long term he is going to be this team's starting two guard next to Anthony Simons. Moving on to the eighth pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have the New Orleans Pelicans selecting Memphis center Jalen Duren. Now, I don't necessarily have Jalen Duren ranked as the eighth prospect on my board. He's right around 12th or 11th, so this isn't necessarily that much of a reach, or according to my big board, at least. Again, this isn't necessarily what I think these teams would do. This is what I would do. But the players that I do have above Jalen Duren are wings. I don't necessarily think that they're great fits with this current New Orleans roster, as they have Herb Jones, Brandon Ingram, and Zion Williamson. I feel like for the most part, their wing spots are solidified, and you don't want to be selecting nobody with the eighth pick that's going to be a bench player, right? You want to select them at a position where you got to put a player that you selected with the eighth pick in a position where they can start and be a contributor right away. And I feel like that can happen with Jalen Duren, a guy who's a great rim protector. I know some people have stated I think my Jalen Duren scouting report was just a little bit controversial, just because at the time I kind of discussed how he really struggles in pick and roll coverages, kind of playing in space a little bit, as he's kind of lost out there sometimes. However, strictly talking as a rim protector, Jalen Duren is one of the best in this class. I'd say he's top 5, top 3 potentially. I'd say Christian Coloco is definitely up there, and Chet Holmgren, maybe Mark Williams as well. Walker Kessler has to be in that conversation as well, but Jalen Duren is definitely amongst those guys. However, I think he's going to be a day one contributor in that aspect. He's disciplined around the rim, doesn't necessarily foul all that much around the rim, does a great job keeping his hands up and really just contesting and getting after shots with his athleticism. And that's really something that New Orleans is lacking. I don't believe Jackson Hayes is going to be around here long term. So I think Jalen Duren immediately fills that role as that defensive center next to Zion Williamson. As we all know, Jonas Valanciunas is not that. And on the offensive side of the floor, he gives this team, a lob threat. He's the best lob threat in this class, hands down. And he also has some playmaking upside on the offensive side of the floor as well. So he's not just a guy who's going to be sitting in the dunker spot. He's a guy who Willie Green can get a little creative with, especially when you have Zion with the ball in his hands. So again, I think Jalen Duren, and he's also 18 years old. He's the second youngest player in this class, only behind Leonard Miller. So again, I think Jalen Duren is the pick here for the New Orleans Pelicans. Moving on to the 9th pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have the San Antonio Spurs selecting Serbian wing Nikola Jovic. Now, Nikola, he does have a lot of concerns on the defensive side of the floor. However, on the offensive side of the floor, there just aren't that many 6'10" bigs that move like he does really on the offensive side of the floor, as well as just in transition, and just has his skill set as a creator for himself and others. He's one of the best, in my opinion, self-creators in this class, and one of the best facilitators in this class. And to get that in a 6'10" package for a player that has, good footwork for being 6'10", as well as is pretty light on his feet, has pretty quick feet. It's pretty hard for San Antonio to pass up this quality of a player here. And I was really making this pick thinking about San Antonio kind of banking on Nikola Jovic's upside as potentially becoming the centerpiece of their offense as he continues to develop over time, as they don't necessarily have anybody on their roster that I really think could legitimately become the centerpiece of an offense and in the playoffs. However, I think Nikola Jovic definitely does have that upside if he continues to develop and potentially develops on the defense side of the floor to really be, that star player for San Antonio. So although he definitely probably doesn't have the highest of ceilings amongst the players available for San Antonio to pick, I think he's a day one fit and one of not the most talented players on the roster from day one. And again, has the highest upside, in my opinion, on the offensive side of the floor out of all their prospects on the roster from day one. Moving on to the 10th pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Washington Wizards selecting Ohio State guard/wing Malachi Branham. And Malachi Branham is probably my favorite prospect in this entire draft class. I think he's very underrated, and I've seen him slowly moving up draft boards. As you guys know, if those of you guys who have followed my channel for a little bit now, I posted my Malachi Branham scouting report a while ago, I'd say about a month and a half ago, and I had him as a lottery talent when I first made that video, when I've slowly seen him start to move up, the consensus big board slash mark drafts. So that makes me very happy, and I think he's really a perfect fit here for Washington, and he's one of the most efficient shooters both on and off the ball in this class. He shot about 40%. His mid-range numbers are very impressive. His numbers from behind the arc are very impressive, and he also finished at about 70% at the rim on not a lot of attempts, on not a lot of those shots being assisted. So he's a very efficient self-creator, and he's also a very good floor spacer. So I think he's a day one starter at the guard spot. I think you can kind of run, Beal as kind of like the main ball handler out there. I think we're kind of past, these positional points or these we're at an era in basketball where it's positionless really, and I think you can get away with running Bradley Beal as the main ball handler on offense, while Malachi Branham is kind of at that other guard spot. He's very cerebral with the ball in his hands, so he can kind of take over from Beal with the ball handling duties at times, as well as space the floor for him. And although I don't necessarily have Branham ranked as the 10th player, he's right around he's right around 12th on my board. So again, it's not that much of an overdraft, but there's just so many forwards and wings in this draft class. However, Washington is kind of loaded with wings, so I decided to go with Malachi Branham here. And then on the defensive side of the ball, he's a very, very good point of attack defender, which is something that Washington desperately needs, as they're one of the league's worst defenses. Moving on to the 11th pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have my very own New York Knicks selecting LSU wing slash forward Tari Eason. Now, Tari Eason doesn't necessarily fill a glaring position of need for my Knicks, as I'd say our biggest two needs are our long-term starting center as well as the point guard position, which hasn't been filled at the long term since maybe Mark Jackson for a couple of years. Before that, Walt Frazier, Raymond Felton for a couple of years in the 2010s. But I mean, like, come on, outside of that, the Knicks have never really had a long-term point guard, and they're not going to be answering that point guard position with this 11th pick. However, they're getting the best player on the board, in my opinion, and the Knicks are much more in a talent acquisition phase rather than needing to reach and fill holes on this roster kind of phase, right? So I think the Knicks just take the best player on the board here, and I think he is a fit with this team. I think he kind of pushes RJ Barrett to the 2 spot, which I feel like is RJ Barrett's more natural position, and he fills that forward spot next to Obi Toppin, assuming Randall isn't going to be here long term. We're talking about the long term for this Knicks team, with forming forming a guard or wing trio with RJ, Tari, and Obi. That's a lot of length and a lot of athleticism. And starting on the defense side of the floor, I mean, Tari is an outstanding defender. I think he's one of the best defensive players in this class. I think you can make an argument that he's a top 5 defenders class. I know that's not necessarily a super popular opinion. However, he pretty much shut down almost everybody that he went up against in the SEC, which is a very good conference. And I feel that he gives Thibodeau not only a very versatile point of attack defender, a guy who's going to be able to guard multiple positions on ball, but a very versatile strong side defender as well, a guy who's going to be able to pick off a lot of passing lanes and get out in transition, which is something that this Knicks team kind of needs. We don't necessarily create all that many turnovers. And then we're talking about on the offense side of the floor, a 6'8" ball handler whose ball handling skills improved as the season went on. He's going to be able to attack closeouts, kind of handle the ball for himself a little bit, and should be able to space the floor reasonably well from day one, and hopefully that aspect of his game continue to grow. So really, this pick for my Knicks is really banking on Tari Eason's offensive upside, kind of developing and growing over time, and as well as just being, an awesome defender from day one, which I think he's very well capable of doing or being. Moving on to the 12th pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder selecting Baylor wing slash forward Jeremy Sohan. Now, I love this pick for Oklahoma City because not only is he the best player on the board, in my opinion, but he also fills a position of need just on paper and as well as on the court, as Jeremy Sohan is one of the best, in my opinion, the best weak side defender in this entire class. He does a great job communicating off ball and is really kind of played like that safety role for this this Baylor defense that was so dominant this previous college season. And although Oklahoma City wasn't a bad defensive team this year, I think they played better. I think they played better than the sum of their parts. Adding a defensive talent like Jeremy Sohan, who has upside as a point of attack defender, maybe not necessarily guarding, real point guards, but as, maybe some taller shooting guards, some threes and whatnot. That's definitely a piece that will not only be a day one starter, but be a day one impact player, especially on that end of the floor. And then also offensively, he's a very solid passer, being able to hit cutters in stride. He had real good chemistry with Kendall Brown this previous season, and he's also a really good cutter in his own right, knows how to move without the ball, similar to what I said about Keegan Murray. I don't think he's as good of a cutter as Keegan Murray, but he knows how to move without the ball, and I think he has a good nose for the ball as well. And even though the shooting numbers were kind of awful, abysmal this previous season, the mid-range not only form but percentages were very encouraging. I feel that if he works on his form, it kind of translates some of the mechanics in his mid-range shot to his three-point shot and his free throw shooting. The percentages will improve, and I think he's just going to be a real nice off-ball weapon next to Shaedon Sharpe and Shea and Josh Giddey, for them to not only hit as while they're cutting, but also you can use some of those guys off ball and kind of take advantage of a guy like Shaedon Sharpe's athleticism off ball. Moving on to the 13th pick of the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Charlotte Hornets with their first of 2 first-round selections, selecting G League Ignite combo guard or wing, Dyson Daniels. Now, in my opinion, Dyson Daniels is one of the best all-around defenders in this class. Very disciplined point of attack defender who does a good job of using his hands, who I think is going to be able to defend multiple positions on the perimeter, from point guards to maybe some taller point guards, not necessarily the best of point guards, but you know certain ones, twos, and threes. He was 6'6" coming into the year. It was kind of looked at, like that 6'6" secondary ball handler or creator. There were rumors, the past couple weeks that he grew to 6'8". Excuse me. However, yesterday at the combine, he did test in at 6'7", which is still very impressive. We're talking about a 6'7" defender who can again guard multiple positions and is a great strong side defender. He's going to be able to pick off passing lanes well, get out in transition, where he's a real great player, not only as a passer but as a finisher. And just we're talking about one of the best, again, all around defenders in this class, and he's going to be an immediate day one contributor for the league's worst defense, in my opinion. And then offensively, again, as I stated, he's a weapon in transition. Not only with the ball in his hands, he's going to be able to hit guys like Kelly Oubre or Miles Bridges or James Bouknight. Hopefully, he gets some playing time. JT Thor, Kai Jones, and so on and so forth in transition, which is going to be very fun. Again, he also does a great job of getting out on his own right and kind of running the floor. And then hopefully, long term, he can be a solid secondary ball handler next to LaMelo Ball. Won't necessarily be the best shot creator for himself, but he has some upside of being able to space the floor, and his percentages improved as the G League season went along. So I think he's a real perfect fit for this Charlotte Hornets team. Moving on to the 14th pick in the 2022 NBA draft, with the final selection in the lottery, the Cleveland Cavaliers select G League Ignite guard Jaden Hardy. Now, I really like Jaden Hardy. I'm much higher on him than the usual consensus. I know a couple people on NBA draft Twitter have him as a top 10 talent on their big boards. However, it's not necessarily in the majority, right? However, I'm still very high on Jaden Hardy. I think he showed the ability to be a high level pick and roll creator, and especially a 3-point shot creator. I think he has a legitimate all-star upside on the offensive side of the floor. As I state here, he has an extremely high ceiling on the offensive side of the floor, and what Cleveland desperately needs is another ball handler. I don't necessarily think that Darius Garland can be, that number one option on the offensive side of the floor. And even though Evan Mobley has an extremely high offensive ceiling, he's really raw right now, especially with shooting the ball and really creating his own shot, and specifically shooting from behind the arc. So getting another offensive creator in there, I think, is Cleveland's number one priority. And I think they're best off doing that in the draft. And I think this is kind of a great situation for everyone. It gives Darius Garland another ball handler, somebody that he can share ball handling duties with. It would kind of almost form, if Jaden Hardy were to hit his offensive ceiling, it would kind of almost be like, a Trailblazers East, where you kind of have, these two extremely talented offensive guards. However, unlike the Trailblazers, throughout that Dame CJ era, they would be surrounded by arguably the best, Nate Duncan, Nate Duncan, Thinking Basketball said, that Evan Mobley was the best defensive rookie since Tim Duncan. So we're talking about that kind of guy playing the 4/5 spot, and then Jarrett Allen, who's an all defensive caliber center next to these guys. So I mean, it's Jaden Hardy's would end up in. It's just about as good of a situation as he could ask for, and I think Jaden Hardy is the immediate starter next to Darius Garland for Cleveland, and hopefully he can develop over time, become more consistent as a creator, and really take the reins along with Darius Garland and kind of lead this Cleveland Cavaliers team to the next level, especially on the offensive side of the floor. And with the final selection in the first half of my second mock draft, the Charlotte Hornets, with their second selection of the first round, select New Zealand breaker wing Ousmane Dieng. Now, Ousmane Dieng is a pretty raw prospect. He was pretty terrible early on for the New Zealand Breakers. However, he kind of came along as the season went along. In the last month and a half or so for the New Zealand Breakers was kind of their star, kind of showcased his potential as, a 6'9" self-creator, as well as a guy who can create for his teammates as well, and also being a versatile defender, being able to cut off passing lanes, some weak side rim protection, as well as a guy who can be a versatile point of attack defender. And, that all sounds great in theory. However, I think he has a lot of work to do, especially especially on the defensive side of the floor with his fouling issue. He has a huge fouling issue right now. And on the offensive side of the floor, he's just a little bit raw everywhere. Again, he's still 18 years old. I think he can afford to add a little bit of meat on his bones as well, kind of help fill out that frame to handle, kind of stronger NBA players. This is much more of a long-term project for Charlotte. And as I stated, a guy who can really contribute on both sides of the floor. And I think from day one in the NBA level, I think he's going to be able to get minutes for Charlotte as, a guy who's going to be able to space the floor and a versatile defender for, again, one of the league's worst defenses. And in my opinion, the league's worst defense. So again, Dyson Daniels was much more of the win now, ready now prospect, as opposed to Osman Dieng being the guy that Charlotte kind of develops over time to hopefully become a long-term starter for the Charlotte Hornets team.